So welcome. My name is Sarah Switzer, and I work at the Center for Community-Based Research. In a moment, I will ask my co-facilitators to introduce themselves. This webinar is part one in a four-part series designed to build community-based evaluation capacity to advance the Sustainable Development Goals. This is a partnered project between the Center of Community-Based Research and Conrad Grebel University College, which are both located on the traditional territories of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples, otherwise known as Waterloo, Ontario. Both the Center for Community-Based Research and Conrad Grebel University College are located on the University of Waterloo campus, which is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations that includes 10 kilometers on each side of the Grand River. Today, we'll be talking about the role of community-based evaluation in localizing the Sustainable Development Goals in the Canadian context. In the spirit of reconciliation, one of the things that we've been talking quite a bit about on our team is interrogating the relationship between the SDGs and the broader efforts of the Truth and Reconciliation outlined in the calls to action. If we were to work towards a 2030 agenda, the only way we can get there is by taking the goals of the TRC seriously. We've got some international guests on the call today. This is some of the benefits of working on Zoom. And so for context, I'm going to ask Madeline to put a link to the TRC in the chat for folks to take a look if you're joining the call outside of Canada. And for folks joining outside of Turtle Island, we can kind of extend this conversation around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action to global decolonization efforts more broadly. So today and over the next month, as we continue conversations about community-based evaluation and the Sustainable Development Goals, we encourage us all to ask, sustainable for whom? We cannot talk about achieving the targets outlined in SDG 16, for example, which is one of the SDGs we'll be focusing on today as kind of a case study of sorts, or SDG 5, gender equity, without also situating or localizing these SDGs in the Canadian context. So here, the longstanding violence against Indigenous women and girls in this country as we move towards May 5th, as well as a counter to this, the incredible community-based organizing efforts and resistance movements led by local Indigenous communities and settler or non-Indigenous allies. We must also take these into account when thinking about localizing. And given the national and possibly international reach of the webinar, we recognize that all of you may be calling in from different locations and have different relationships to those places on different territories. And throughout today, and our upcoming webinar series, we really encourage you to make use of the chat box and join the dialogue by sharing different examples or contributions of work happening on the ground in your own communities, so you can we can kind of incorporate those contributions throughout the webinar itself. So some housekeeping details for today. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted online on our website. In theory, it should only record the active speaker. However, please feel free to turn off your camera or change your name if you do not want this information to be captured. The chat will not be recorded or shared, but we will definitely send out links afterwards. We ask you to please keep your microphone off just because we have a number of folks calling in on the call. And finally, for tech questions, if you have any questions at all, you can reach out to Madeline. I'm actually going to ask you, Madeline, in a moment, if you can change your name on the chat, on the participant line for tech, and that way folks can find you easily. So feel free to reach out to Madeline throughout. Okay, so given that, it's time for introductions. I introduced myself briefly at the beginning. My name is Sarah Switzer, and I'm a senior researcher at the Center for Community-Based Research. I am personally zooming in from Takaranto, otherwise known as Toronto, as covered by Treaty 13. We encourage you all to introduce yourselves into chat. Tell us a little bit about who you are and where you're calling in from. And I'm going to pass it off to my co-facilitators to introduce themselves as well. I'll pass it off to you first, Paul, since you're below me on the Zoom screen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Heidebrecht. I'm joining from Conrad Grebel University College, one of the partners in this project. Very excited to be here.
Hi, everyone. It's Rich Jansen. I'm from the Center for Community-Based Research, also in Waterloo.
Hi, everyone. I am Jean Dodieu Bassavose. I am a researcher at the Center for Community the Center for Community-Based Research. I am calling from Kitchener, Ontario.
Hi, everyone. I'm Madeline, and I am a student intern at CCBR and a graduate student at Conrad Grebel University.
Thank you all. And thank you to those of you who are populating the chat. It looks like we've got folks calling in from all corners of the country. So that's really, really terrific to see. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Jean, who's going to tell us a little bit about what we're doing today. Over to you, Jean.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Here is our aim for today. We're going to be focusing on what community-based evaluation is, and what community-based evaluation is important, and finally, how community-based evaluation can be a helpful approach to localizing SDGs. Today's webinar is simply just it's an overview. We will be diving into how to do community-based evaluation next. And each webinar will share training on how to conduct community-based evaluation with a particular focus on SDGs 4, 5, and 16. However, all are welcome. Please register for those webinars. Let's just have a little bit a look about why this project. We have been conducting this project since May last year. As I mentioned previously, this is a partnered project by Conrad Grebel University College and the Center for Community-Based Research. This project is funded by the Employment and Social Development Canada. It is really an opportunity to engage stakeholders in reflective practice when working to eliminate violence and promote peaceful and equitable societies. This project is an opportunity to build community-based evaluation capacity of organizations involved in advancing the SDGs with a focus on peace, gender, equality, and education. It is part of a bigger agenda, the agenda about helping Canada achieve its agenda for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. As you know, the Sustainable Goals are a universal call to action to end poverty, protect and care for the planet, and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity, adopted by the UN in 2015. So in that year, in 2015, Canada adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development at the UN General Assembly, along with 192 United Nations, or the member of the United Nations. The 2030 Agenda and its 17 associate goals is a global call to action to end poverty and care for our planet and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030. Each goal is aligned with its own targets and indicators. At the Center for Community-Based Research, we are interested in how communities or on how community-based evaluation might support the 2030 agenda. Yeah, if you are really curious about it, Canada's 2030 agenda, I would request Madeleine to put a few links into chat. Sarah, before I end this, I wanted to say that this project has particularly focused on the 3 SDGs. Here I mean SDG 5, 16 and 4. Madeleine, could you please also put in chat the link about the target or presenting the target for those SDGs? Yeah, Sarah, I hand over it to you now.
Thank you so much, Jean. Okay. This is great. I see the chat is a bit of a flurry, so we'll definitely send some of these links out again afterwards. Welcome to everyone who's just joined us, and I appreciate everyone noting in chat where you're calling in from, the lens that you're on, and the roles that, the hats that you're wearing today. So we're going to do a bit of an exercise just to get a sense of who is in the room and the different SDGs that you are working on. Before we do this, I'm just going to guide folks through how to turn the annotate function on. We're going to be using the annotate function for this particular exercise. So if you don't know how to turn it on, I want you to go to the top right-hand corner of your screen and click View Options. Sometimes you have to use your mouse and hover around the top for it to activate. And when you click View, you should find an option to annotate, and you're going to click that annotate option. Okay, and then a toolbar is going to pop up similar to the toolbar that you see on the screen, and you're going to find the stamp icon. And so if you hover over stamp, a few different options will come up. And it should be available. If it's not available, that's okay. I'm going to give you an alternate option to participate if you can't access the annotate option. So for those of you who can access annotate, I just want you to stamp the page to see if it's working. Great. Terrific. So it looks like folks are able to access it okay. Excellent. Excellent. And again, for those of you who are having trouble, you can send a message to Madeline. She's got her name marked as for tech in the presenter list, but we'll also give you an alternate option to participate. All right, so just give it another 30 seconds as folks are fiddling around with it. So it's the top right-hand corner. You hover under View, scroll down to Annotate. The bar of options comes up, and you're going to click Stamp. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to ask folks just to pause annotating for a moment. And I'm going to clear the screen. So I'm just going to ask folks not to annotate just yet. Excellent. So we did it. So here is the exercise. So the particular exercise that I'm doing, just to give credit where credit's due, it was inspired by a webinar recently attended by Alicia Richards, who's an SDG consultant. Check out her work. And I thought it was a pretty neat one to start us off. So thank you to Alicia for inspiring this exercise. I learned an enormous amount from her talk. So the SDGs are comprised of 17 unique goals and various targets, and they have, some challenges, which we'll be discussing today, but they also present some opportunities. Using the annotate feature, I want to ask each of you to stamp or check any of the SDGs that you are currently working towards in your personal work within your organizations, and you can stamp multiple SDGs if you want. If you cannot use annotate, type into chat. And thank you to those of you troubleshooting in the chat. Yes, you can go under View Options, try that button. And if you can't, please just type into chat. Wow, what a great list here. I'm just taking this all in real time. Okay. So we've got quite a number of folks stamping partnerships, gender equity, peace, climate action, poverty, health, decent work and growth. Terrific. Excellent. And for those of you who've noted in chat, it sounds like some of you also do all of them, right? So here's one possibility for the SDGs, one opportunity is that, you know, they really do provide kind of a platform for collaboration and cross-sectoral collaboration and conversation. And as we see in this very short, brief exercise, you know, there's so much work that is already happening on the ground. And that's going to be really the key thread throughout this webinar and our future webinars, is that community-based evaluation and the SDGs and localizing the SDGs starts with the work that you're already doing on the ground. That is absolutely essential. With that, I'm going to clear the screen. So I will ask that folks stop annotating from here on in until we ask you again. And I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Jean. Oh, Jean, I think you're muted.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I was muted. Thank you, Sarah, for the exercise. Yeah, it has been a really good thing to have those SDGs developed and adopted. But as we are observing, as a global framework, the SDGs present some challenges. To effectively implement the SDGs as a global framework for building a more just, caring, effective, and inclusive and peaceful world, it is necessary to address the following challenges that the implementation of the SDGs is encountering. Among those challenges, we have just the fact that being at the top-down approach, the framework may fail to address the political, historical, and cultural contexts of local community-based initiatives and priorities. Yeah, for example, in Canada, the SDGs cannot be achieved without also looking at truth and reconciliation efforts with Indigenous communities. There's also difficult to gather evidence about impacts that are aligned with local goals or local priorities. Another challenge is that by focusing exclusively on outcomes, important process considerations can be overlooked. Another challenge may be about the local actors may have to shift their programs in order to access fundings aligned with the global agenda. Despite these challenges, the SDGs could be productive framework for global and local collaboration, provided the SDGs are grounded in community realities. The Tamaric Institute's Guide for Advancing the Sustainable Development Goals in Your Communities offers the following suggestion when localizing the SDGs. Those suggestions include that raise awareness of the SDGs by engaging and building relationships with local communities, identify meaningful indicators that represent the local community's needs and resources, align existing local plans and programs with global goals, consult on local priorities to develop a shared vision, invite diverse voices to lead offering support to communities and individuals to enable participation and ensure sustainability. The movement to localize is taking place in many communities across the globe. Many municipalities are also working to localize the SDGs via voluntary local review. While work at the municipality level is essential, it is also important to engage community-based organizations, startups, and other grassroots movements in conversations about the SDGs and their implementation. Community-based evaluation is one mechanism to spark conversations about the SDGs within and across organizations and sectors. Rather than starting with the 17 SDGs and related targets and indicators, a community-based evaluation approach to Canada's 2030 agenda asserts that organizations, startups, and grassroots initiatives start the conversations about SDGs within the work they are already doing on the ground, and from there, links to the broader global framework. Paul, I pass it to you for the next, as we continue the discussion, the conversation.
Thanks, Jean. I think that's gives everyone a great window into some of the conversations that our project team has been having over the past few months, and some of the wisdom that we've gleaned from others across the country, including the Tamarack Institute. But we know that there's a lot more wisdom in the room besides our little group. And so we want to prompt you, hopefully, again, that window into our conversations around both the promise and the potential pitfalls that the SDGs have to offer to us. I'd like you to reflect on what you think the challenges of localizing the Sustainable Development Goals are or have been in your own contexts. And want to invite you to take a couple of minutes. Maybe if you have some paper in front of you, you could even reflect a bit on this, and then share it in the chat as a way of, again, giving us all a sense of the various perspectives that we have. So I'll pause for a moment as you reflect on it, and we'll give a few minutes to this. So don't worry about rushing your thoughts. We want you to, again, reflect a bit on this question, and then I'll highlight a few of the things that start to emerge into the chat. So thanks to those of you who are starting to enter your thoughts into the chat, and recognizing we've got people working at a variety of different SDGs and in a variety of different geographic contexts across the country. We're really excited to, again, have this virtual space to share our learnings. Christiane noted the capacity of local leadership for engaging in this agenda. We're all taxed, I'm sure, and interested in demonstrating and conveying our impact to a variety of stakeholders and in a variety of ways. And this is yet another, again, challenge of timing. I'm not sure, Pamela, precisely what you're referring to there, but it is striking to me hearing this reminder. This is the 2030 agenda adopted in 2015. We're now at 2022. We're well on the way toward 2030. And some of those ambitions that the global community and Canada as a nation committed to now 7 years ago, we're realizing we haven't made the progress we need to make. Thanks, Hillary. Yeah, definitely. It's important to recognize that there are various levels of conversancy and awareness and understanding of the SDGs, and we need to hear all voices in this, as alluded to earlier. This whole process being top down initially. Yeah, some common themes here. Sorry, I'm the chat's moving fast and furious here. Appreciate these reflections. Well, I'll encourage you to keep adding some thoughts there. Yeah, I really appreciate the engagement, and again affirms some of the value of the value that everybody's able to bring to this conversation. But Sarah, I guess we'll keep things moving along, so I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you so much, Paul, and for starting that conversation with us, and to all of you for putting your comments in chat. The chat was moving fast, so as Paul said, it's a bit hard to keep up. But what I saw in terms of many of the connections to community-based evaluation we'll be talking about today. Today's very much an overview. We will be going much deeper in subsequent webinars, but you know, building the capacity of local stakeholders, learning from local communities, navigating funding, figuring out what is this connection between these very kind of lofty big goals, and how does it connect to the work on the ground. We'll be talking about all of that throughout the series. All right, so what is community-based evaluation? As I mentioned, we will be going over this in depth, including the how. So webinars 2, 3, and 4 that Jean alluded to earlier, and Madeline will put a link to register later on, really go into specifics, and we hope that folks can join us for that. Today, we'll provide a very brief snapshot. So what comes to mind when folks hear the word evaluation? I encourage you to type into chat. What comes to mind? Measuring outcomes, data. Did we say what we said we were going to do? Learning, evidence, metrics. Measurement, yeah, and all kinds of measurement, right? We can think about evidence really broadly in terms of people's stories and lived experiences, as well as quantitative data. Continuous improvement, yeah. Assessing value, communicating results, yes, that's a really, really big piece. Communication again, accountability, yeah, accountability to communities, to stakeholders. Yeah. So, in essence, evaluation is an organized and systematic approach to collecting information about activities and outcomes that help improve an intervention and describe its accomplishments, right? And another way of thinking about this is kind of, what story does an organization want to tell about its work, right? Overall, though, the purpose of evaluation should be to improve a program and describe its accomplishments. And when we hear about evaluation, we often think about it or hear about it as linked explicitly to funding requirements, as this kind of like accountability check. That's something done at the end of a process, and then it just kind of sits on the shelf. But really, in order to be truly effective and to be linked with, you know, moving the needle on some of these SDGs, the focus must be on meaningful reflection. It must be connected to the local realities on the ground, stakeholders' needs, and we'll be exploring this in greater depth throughout the series itself. And I see some of you are populating the chat with similar reflections. So we're going to do another brief exercise, and then in a moment I'll pass it off to my colleague Rich, who'll speak a little bit more to community-based evaluation. So you can, for this particular exercise, we're going to use Annotate again, but if you cannot use the Annotate feature, you can always do this in chat. All right. So I encourage folks to reflect on this statement. Evaluation always makes programs better. All right. If you were doing a survey or you were standing in a line, if it was in person, where might you be on this line? This is kind of like a human Likert scale activity. So if you strongly agree with this statement, I'm going to ask you to stamp, and I see some of you have already done it, closer to 1. If you strongly disagree, you can stamp closer to 10. You can find yourself on the line. And if you are struggling to use Annotate, you can put your numeric value into chat. And for folks that joined late, the Annotate function can be found in the right-hand side of your screen. You can cover under View or View Options, click Annotate, and then the menu bar should pop up. I'll give folks about 20 more seconds to stamp away. I see some of the notes in chat. That might be a trick question. So when we often do this exercise in workshops, and we actually did a workshop similar to this, but it was with less than 54 people on the call, we asked people at the end to tell us why. Where do you stand on this scale? And what's interesting, it often comes back to, I think I saw a note here by Julia. You said, but it depends, right? And some of you I see have kind of put yourself kind of in the middle, right? Does evaluation always make a program better, right? We often say it depends. Now, later, we will open the Zoom floor to all of you via chat. Again, Paul will host us another conversation to share a little bit about where why you stamped where you did. And we can think through this kind of depends more deeply in terms of what does it mean to do community-based evaluation, how to make sure that evaluation questions are grounded in the lives and realities of communities, how do we ensure that they reflect stakeholder needs, and how do we ensure we move those findings into action. And I saw some of you noted that in chat earlier. All right, I'm going to clear the screen here just a moment. And I'm going to pass it off to Rich.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Yes, that was a trick question, mostly to get you thinking about that word always and what it depends on. And so I just want to talk a little bit about community-based approach to evaluation. And there's different ways that you can approach evaluation. And when we say the word approach, it's more of your posture, right, that you take when you're doing evaluation, not so much the methods, but how you go about doing the evaluation. And you can think about an approach to evaluation in one way along the simple continuum of expert-based versus community-based. On the one side, we have that expert-based evaluation where one person or a group of people holds all that expertise. They come in to assess the program. They prescribe what is to be done. It can have more of a judgmental feel, or sometimes it's done more in reaction to external requirements. And then on the other side, we can have what some people call a community-based approach, which involves different stakeholders working in partnership, acknowledging the different expertise amongst the collective that's there. Evaluation that can sometimes have more of a feeling of reflecting together, more of internal motivation, more for program development and learning, and having attuned to future directions. So what we're proposing in this webinar series is a community-based approach as one way to localize SDGs. And when we think about community-based approach, it begs the question, what does that word community-based mean? How is evaluation different if you have that qualifier in front of it that says community-based? And so we want to just unpack that for a moment. And on the next slide, you can see some of our thinkings about community-based evaluation. We've been around for 40 years that have been trying to do community-based evaluation, and with our partners and looking at the literature, coming to see 3 hallmarks of a community-based approach: that it's stakeholder-driven, participatory, and action-oriented. So stakeholder-driven is that it's practical, it's relevant, it makes sense to people who are at the center of the intervention, the program. In fact, it's the program's theory of change that drives the research agenda, the evaluation, more so than, in this case, the SDG big framework. So think particular as opposed to the big universal. Participatory means that it's collaborative. It involves people. It thinks who has a stake in this issue, in this program, and how do we meaningfully involve them throughout the evaluation process, from conceptualization through doing the evaluation to the use of the evaluation to the action that comes as a result of the evaluation. So it's participatory. And action-oriented is that the results are useful to the people who are involved. It's not only useful for external audiences, it may also be useful for external audience, but it's particularly useful for those who are at the center of the particular program or initiative. I just want to highlight one other word on this slide, and that's that word strives. These are aspirations that we try as much as possible with the time and resources and people we have to be as stakeholder-driven, as participatory, and as action-oriented as possible. And for those of you who like research traditions, the philosophy or the theory behind research, if we think of these 3 hallmarks, they link to global research traditions. So stakeholder-driven links to indigenous research traditions of self-determination, of who owns the research, who owns the evaluation. The participatory links to research traditions of the Global South and Latin America and other places. People like Paulo Freire, who worked with people to collectively come up with identifying the issues that impact their lives and doing something about that. And the action-oriented is research tradition of the Global North. People like Kurt Lewin and others, research in motion, they saw research as, and thinking about research as being practically relevant. So those are the 3 hallmarks we can think about community-based evaluation. We can also think in terms of the goals of the research. What does it function to do? Why do we do the research? Why do we do this evaluation? And like other evaluations, one of the reasons we do it is to learn. We ask questions, we get answers, we summarize those answers, and we've learned something. And so a community-based approach to evaluation is like other approaches to evaluation in that it is an exercise of learning. We are producing knowledge through the evaluation exercise. But that's not all. There's other goals as well. And one other goal is to share those results, to be good communicators, and maybe to multiple audiences, thinking strategically, how do we package, how do we bring together this information in a way that people actually can have uptake of the learnings and do something with the knowledge that we've learned. So mobilizing the knowledge that we've learned. But a community-based approach has a third goal in addition to these 2 goals, and that's in building relationships. It is a relational exercise. It is a matter of facilitation, that we aren't only technical evaluators, researchers, we're also mobilizing people through the act of evaluation. So there's the 3 hallmarks, the 3 goals, and then are the 4 phases and 11 nonlinear steps of community-based evaluation. And this is what we will be unpacking in the subsequent webinars. So you can see the 4 phases of community-based evaluation there. I guess more traditional evaluation would have 2 phases. If you take a research methods course at university, you're probably dealing with phase 2 and phase 3. How do we go about planning for the evaluation, and how do we go about implementing those methods that we've chosen? But a community-based approach adds some work up front in laying the foundation, and adds some work at the end. The research is not done until you're acting and doing something with the findings. I'll also point out that arrow looping back from phase 3 to phase 2 that this is community research. It's done in settings that can be dynamic and changing. And so you can change, and it's good to change your planning if your context has shifted. And I think the pandemic was a great example of that. A lot of the evaluations that we worked at CCBR, we had to do that looping back from phase 3 to phase 2 years ago when the pandemic hit, not changing the purpose of the research, but changing how we had planned it would actually carry itself out. I'll just also point out the arrow that goes from phase 4 to phase 1. For me, this is the happy arrow because it says that you don't have to do everything in one cycle of evaluation, that you can chunk it. You can make it doable, thinking with your partners about what you want to do in one cycle, whether that's 8 months, a year, whatever your time frame that you want. And then you can do that, go through these 4 phases, and then think, what's your next step of reflection, of evaluating together? And if we animate this slide, we also see that there's a lot in these 4 phases. If we think about laying the foundation, you can see those 4 technical steps, that it's about identifying stakeholders, having a stakeholder steering committee, and we'll be talking about the difference between doers of evaluation, the research team, and the guiders of evaluation, the stakeholder steering committee, in future webinars. Identifying the assumptions of evaluation, what makes good evaluation, and making sure that there's clarity amongst the group around that. Highlighting the programs or the initiatives theory of change, and we'll talk about what is a theory of change, the activities and the intended outcomes, and how do you go about building of that, because that's really the GPS for your evaluation, making sure that it's your unique theory of change that's driving the evaluation agenda. And then being clear on the purpose of the evaluation. Evaluation can have many purposes, but together as a group, identifying a common purpose for the evaluation. Is it a formative? Is it a summative? Is it a developmental evaluation? And those kinds of things. So really this phase is about negotiating goals and roles and doing this collaboratively, collectively. Before you hit phase 2, which is the traditional planning of the evaluation, thinking about your main research questions that flows out of your purpose, thinking about how you're going to answer those questions through your methods, qualitative, quantitative, mix of them, multiple perspectives, those kinds of considerations, and then having an analysis plan. And then phase 3 simply is acting out on that plan. So I won't talk much about that, but being attuned to ethics throughout all of these 4 phases, but especially in phase 3 when we're gathering data. And then finally acting on the findings in phase 4. And this is where the evaluation continues. It's not waiting for the final report, but it is in order for to have action. Action can happen throughout, but having the action, having attention to the details of the action in phase 4, sharing learnings, and then thinking about how the recommendations can actually become reality. So if we think about all of these 4 phases, we can think about doing the evaluation as phase 1, 2, and 3, and then we can think about using the evaluation results in decision-making for program in phase 4. So very much a utilization focus to the evaluation. One more thing before I stop on this slide, you see that throughout, you see the relational and technical aspects. That yes, it is evaluation, so there's some technical research stuff that you need to do, but it's also throughout a facilitation and engagement of people. So that's the relational part that happens throughout. So we'll use this as our GPS for the remainder of the webinars, and we'll unpack each of those points and talk about that. And we have a workbook that can also help you facilitate your own conversations in your group through each of these. If you count up all those little points, those 11 nonlinear steps. For those of you who like definitions, everything I just said in one sentence. So here's one definition that we sometimes use. There's other definitions out there. But if we think about a community-based approach to evaluation, it's an approach that involves the active participation of stakeholders, those whose lives are affected by the issue in some way, whether directly or indirectly. Those in all phases of research for the purpose of producing useful results to make positive changes. And our next webinar will start with phase 1, laying the foundation. And we'll start unpacking about how to go about identifying stakeholders. How do you map your stakeholders for your particular intervention, whether that's a direct service type of intervention, whether it's a collective impact intervention, whether it's institutional, municipal kind of level, whatever scope of intervention and type of intervention, who is your stakeholders and how do you map them? And then thinking about how to organize a steering committee, who's on the steering committee, and what does that look like? Building your research team as well. Do you use peer researchers, for example, community researchers as part of your evaluation? And throughout that phase is an exercise of building trust. We'll talk about assumptions of evaluation and expectations, making sure that there's common understanding of what evaluation means amongst the groups that you're involving. And we'll talk quite a bit about theory of change. Some of you are familiar with that term and logic models. We'll go through that. We have templates around that, some exercises about designing your own theory of change, thinking about things like attribution and contribution, direct versus indirect, short-term versus long-term outcomes, individual versus collective type of outcomes, inputs, outputs, what's the difference between an output and an outcome? Those kinds of things are all part of that theory of change conversation. And lastly, we also will talk about the purpose of your evaluation. It may sound like a simple thing, but we'll get you to write out a purpose statement. The purpose of this evaluation is to, and then you'll have a verb. What is your verb? Is it to assess? Is it to explore? Is it to determine? Is it to investigate? What's behind some of those verbs? And then what's the scope of your evaluation? And then we'll push you to say, in order to, we'll do all of that in order to cause you to think about the use, the action that you're doing this understanding in order to do something. And what is it that you're trying to do through your evaluation, so that we name that right up front. So that'll be the focus of our next webinar. And we'll start to unpack this general 4 phases and 11 nonlinear steps. Paul, over to you again.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks for the overview of a community-based approach to evaluation, and also like a teaser for how much more there is yet to for us to be able to dig into on this. We wanted to provide space, another moment for you to just taken in a lot, to reflect on the promise you might be seeing in a community-based evaluation approach, particularly when it comes to addressing some of the challenges that we were talking about earlier with localizing the SDGs. We're obviously really enthused and excited about the potential. We see a lot of direct ways that a community-based approach can address some of those challenges, but really want to get a sense of how that's landing for you. So take a moment to reflect on that. And then once again, we'd encourage you to add your thoughts into the chat, and with apologies that we're again eager to gather the collective wisdom and insight of the room here and to get a clear sense of how this is landing with you. Won't be able to do justice, I know, in just a couple of minutes here to all of that, but we are taking note. You should know, you should be sure to know that. So how do you think a community-based approach to evaluation, as you've heard it described here now, could be helpful in the challenge of localizing the SDGs in your context? So yeah, community buy-in, contextual knowledge, the process, attention to the process, and a structured way of establishing a process to ensure meaningful consultation of stakeholders. Lots of good reactions. Glad people are seeing those connections as well. And again, just to acknowledge, some of you were noting in the chat earlier, some resonance you saw between a community-based approach to evaluation and other approaches you might be more familiar with. And yeah, there are lots of different approaches to evaluation, and I think some good resonances with others as well here. Yeah. Again, underscoring that importance of local stakeholder knowledge. And being participatory. I know we've got a couple of minutes here, so Sarah, I'll hand it off to you when you feel appropriate. I know there's some things I'm sure you'll be able to flag or highlight as we're winding our way toward the end of this, but yeah, greater opportunities for innovation. Yeah, it's interesting. I think it strikes me that some of the initial reactions are leaning more into the front end, the process, the doing of the evaluation, but there's definitely opportunity here in terms of how we are enabled to act on these findings in order to make progress around SDGs in new ways. So good to see some reference to the fourth step in that process. Yeah, this is great. I hope that people are getting a shared sense of our enthusiasm for the potential here. And again, acknowledging that there's a lot more we could be talking about, and we're looking forward to talking about in future webinars and with other resources that this project is aiming to be providing to our communities across the country. Yeah, thanks everyone. Maybe I'll pass it off to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Paul, and thanks to everyone for keeping the chat aflutter there. So as my colleagues have referred to throughout, today's webinar is very much an overview. It's a bit of a teaser of what's to come, and we're really looking forward to continuing these conversations. To learn a bit more and to further engage with this work, we want to encourage you to register for the upcoming conversations. As Rich mentioned previously, and Jean at the beginning of the webinar, each webinar is going to really unpack each stage of the community-based evaluation approach and open it up to conversations about how this might be relevant or connect with the larger sustainable development goals, and we're really interested in learning from all of you. So all of these webinars will be posted online. We have a website that we'll put in the chat momentarily. This is where you can find the webinars themselves. If you can't make the upcoming webinars, we will also have the workbook online. There was a question earlier about how do you access this workbook. We'll be talking more about the workbook in upcoming webinars, but it will be online, and you can download the slide deck as well. And it looks like some of you have already registered. Yay, excellent. That is great to hear. And again, I'll ask Madeline, the chat's aflutter, so I miss it. But Madeline, please, if you could pop the link for all the individual sign up links into the chat, that would be great. And indeed, we are going to be saving the chat for us to kind of take a look at. Because we haven't asked for people's permission, we won't be sharing the chat widely, but we'll be saving it internally. And perhaps that's something we can kind of think about for future webinars as well, because there's so much valuable knowledge in this room here. So here's our website. The link is www.eval-for-localizing-sdgs.com. It is still, it is a work in progress, as websites often are. And I say that with an eye to opportunity, because one of the last pages that we're still developing is our external resources page. And so there's so much wisdom in the room. If you are working on a project, you want us to feature it, please get in touch. The external resources page will be live shortly, and we'd love to feature all of your work. It's really, this is the starting part for future conversation. Finally, stay in touch. Here's our information at the Center for Community-Based Research and Conrad Grebel University College. As I mentioned, this is a partnered project, so you can contact us via this address or reply to any of the Eventbrite emails that you received, and we'll reach you that way. And finally, a big thank you to all. We were kind of, we were surprised by the turnout. We were thrilled by how many people registered, and the chat again has been a flurry, more so than we fully could have appreciated or expected. And so big gratitude to all of you for continuing this conversation. And we look forward to more conversation on Friday, April 22nd at 12 p.m. So stay in touch, and thanks again, and we'll see folks soon. Bye, everyone.